Okay, nope.
Okay, so I'm talking and people can hear me. Yes. Okay, this is great. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our first Wine and Wages event. This is a play off of our Wine and Ballots event that we normally do on election year. So we're excited to vary this up a little bit. Welcome. You are muted upon entry. And I don't know why I looked at the room whenever I said that. I meant that for the Zoom folks. Yeah, you're muted upon entry. If you have questions, please put them in the chat to the host. There's a bunch of us that are watching it, or you can put it out to the whole group, and we will get to those as soon as we can. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act that took effect on January 1st, 2021. This is the first in the nation policy aimed at preventing pay disparities amongst men and women and prohibiting companies from relying on wage history to set salaries for individual prospective employees. Among other things, we have a whole bunch of experts on to educate us on, the full breadth of this law. So we're super excited to jump in tonight. I'm going to throw it over to Harley Jackson, our leader of the events committee, to talk through everything. But real quick, this is just our agenda for tonight. Harley is going to give us an intro, and then we're going to have Senator Danielson on to talk to us for a few minutes, and then our panelists with a short breakout room, and then we'll come back and wrap up. So without further ado, Harley, I'll throw it over to you. Cool.
And then also, I know we are rocking kind of like a hybrid situation. So if at any point audio is weird, please just put that into the chat, because as we said, a lot of people are monitoring it. Those in the room, you can just wave your hands and let us know. But yeah, we want to make sure this is a good experience for everyone. So with that said, please remember that this is a nonpartisan event. The Junior League of Denver is a nonpartisan organization. So please conduct yourself as such. And make sure you're asking questions in the chat. We've gone over with the people in the room on how they can ask questions. If you're new, we have posted notes, etc. on the table. I have to do non-posted notes. But yeah, please ask your questions in real time. The way the event is structured, we'll have each of smaller chunks of trainings, and each of the Q&As will be guided by the questions that are asked in real time during kind of the overview of that section. And we'll be, grouping these as such. We probably won't be able to get to every question, but please ask them, because I'm sure if you're wanting to ask it, someone else is also wanting to ask it. And we're really thankful to have partnered with Blanchard Family Wines for this event and a lot of other things we do in Junior League. So please visit the link below, and there's 2 promo codes. The first one I think is off everything, but also if you're trying to ship the wine, there is one for free shipping. I think that's for if you do more than 2 bottles, but I'm hoping everyone has used a promo code before, and you can just put them in and see which one is better. But yeah, so with that, we're going to do a kickoff. I'm going to try and make it smaller, but I think maybe Senator Danielson can turn on your video if you want, or we can look at this lovely photo we have. I'll try and work through this. There we go. But just to kick things off, Senator Danielson from District 20 was the key sponsor on this legislation. I think, can you hear me? I want to see, I know we have a couple videos, so we saw that you joined. Oh, perfect, now I can see you, and all of us in the room. So first off, thank you so much for joining us. We're really honored to have you here. But just the first question we had was, why did you sponsor the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act?
Thank you, Sandy. There you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sound great.
Okay, so I can't see me, so it's kind of nice because now I don't have to look at me talking. So, and I can't see the room. Are there a lot of people in the room, or just a few?
I will pan out. It would be very funny if it was just me.
Hey, all right. Oh, that's great. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. It's really my privilege to work with this group, and I could not have done any of the equal pay work without the Colorado Women's Bar Association, groups like 9 to 5, the Women's Foundation, just wonderful partners out in the community who are invested in equality for women and girls. So, so thank you very much for having me here tonight. Why did I sponsor the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act? You know, when I ran for office back in 14, it was something that I promised to work on, and leading into you know, the year that we did the bill, it became a kind of a demand of the public. So the climate shifted a bit in our favor, which is great. But I started working on the issue a long time ago. Before I got elected, I ran America Votes in a couple of states. So that's some voting rights work, again, geared towards equality. I also worked for a reproductive rights organization. So, you know, this kind of issue has always been at the forefront. And once I understood the pay discrepancy between men and women for the exact same work, as soon as I got elected, I decided it was going to be a priority of mine. But of course, it was already a priority of the community and had been for a very long time. So it was a great match. I ran a bill years before the Equal Pay Act to even just to try and sustain the Equal Pay Commission. I don't know if anybody in this call or in the room remembers the Equal Pay Commission, but I did a simple bill just to continue that. And even that was so politicized back in 2015 and 2016 that it failed. So again, I did a smaller bill around pay transparency and equal pay the year after that. And then, and I know this is a nonpartisan room, but the reality of the state legislature did shift a bit. So some of the partisan opposition to equal pay for equal work bills ended when the Democrats took control of the state Senate in 2018. So like I said, I totally respect where everybody's coming from, but there was a big difference because we no longer had a majority in the state Senate that was opposed to the issue of equal pay. And when I say that, the partisan response or the partisan opposition to all of these bills that I did leading up to the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act had always basically been a denial that there was pay discrepancy. So if women were paid less than men for the exact same work, there was nothing wrong with that. It was their fault. It was because they chose to have a family, or because they took a different path, or just that it really didn't exist. So, you know, once the politics shifted in favor of a Democratic majority in both the House and the Senate, there was a clear path forward to try and run some more substantial, really comprehensive equal pay work. And that's when I connected with the leaders in the community who, of course, had been working on the issue for a very long time and were really ready to push forward some of the policies that we kind of dreamed of doing. I mean, to be honest, I didn't think that I would pass anything like this during my tenure, just because it was so robust and so comprehensive. But that's kind of how everything lined up for that year. You know, during the 2018 elections, the public really demanded it. Poll after poll after poll showed that equal pay for equal work was one of their most important issues that they were going to determine who they voted for. So it wasn't just any longer kind of our idea and our goals and our values. It was very much at the forefront of people's thoughts out in the community. Our friends and neighbors were basically demanding that we take action. And when they did that, and we had a different makeup in the legislature, there was a clear path. And so we put together what I think is the strongest bill in the country.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think you touched on this a little bit, but were there any additional ones you want to cover on specific unequal pay instances in Colorado that spurred you to run this legislation?
Well, so yes, I mean, I graduated from college in 2020, right? So I've been in the workforce for 2 decades plus now. And I think, unfortunately, even young women that are coming into the workforce understand that there's just been pay discrepancy, there will be pay discrepancy, and until we pass the law, there wasn't really anything illegal about it. You couldn't discriminate against someone for other reasons. You know, we define gender discrimination for your pay, and then made it something that you cannot do any longer in Colorado. It was a really important piece of the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act. But the reason that I bring up sort of the length of my time in the workforce, although the equal, the Equal Pay Act and federally went into effect decades ago, the reality of it is that women were paid 20 cents on the dollar less than men for the exact same work. And that's if you're lucky enough to be a white woman. If you happen to be any other race, or if you happen to have another qualifying characteristic, like you happen to be LGBT, or you might have a disability, or you might be an older woman, or any combination of these factors, of course, the pay discrepancy between women and white men just grows. So much so that, Latino women in Colorado just marked Equal Pay Day literally a few days ago. So, families that I've known for years, friends, neighbors, myself, women are experiencing difficulties trying to make our way through the economy because we just plain don't earn what we should, or we're not paid what we earn, is how I should say it. So, I can't tell you how many countless specific unequal pay instances there were, because I've been working for 20 years. And then you visit with women who are older than me, and it's 20 times worse the longer that you talk to someone who's been in the workforce. So, you can total upwards of $1 million or $2 that you've lost during the course of your career simply because you happen to be a woman. So I think that, again, my intolerance for that kind of discrimination, I think it finally caught up with the public, and more people had become aware of the reality of this kind of discrimination. And, it was more broadly known that this was an issue. And we did have finally a piece of legislation that would address a lot of these problems. So, it was, oh, and I will also say, when I say that partnering with the Women's Bar Association and other community leaders like that, the value in their experience trying to prosecute these cases or trying to represent women who had been discriminated against was so invaluable, because they could point out where the statute fails Colorado women, how the statute allows for this kind of discrimination, and how we should change it in order to accommodate them, as they've become so, over the decades, so experienced in representing women all over the state. So kind of the combination of anecdotal stories, personal experience, the common knowledge in the community, raising awareness to a high level, the experience of the Bar Association and the other community leaders on how we should address this in statute, again, kind of came together in a nice way to form the bill.
Yes, and I know I'm not going to steal any thunder because we're introducing panelists later, but I know one of the panelists helped to draft the legislation, so we're excited to learn more.
Who else who is on the panel?
Yeah, I was like, what? If you guys each want to say hi. We have Rachel, but it's Laura Wolf.
Oh, yes, of course.
Actually, and hi, Senator Danielson. I was working on it also. So both of us today.
I was like, I think Rachel was also involved, but we,
yeah,
that was straight out. So
yes, so I will let them tell their story, but I have to tell you from my perspective, when I say invaluable, it was daily, day in and day out for months and months and months and months where, I mean, I'll tell you guys, I mean, I was an art major, okay? So I am not a lawyer. It doesn't mean I'm any less passionate about the issue, but if I didn't have the women's bar as a partner, this bill would not have happened. I can say that with all confidence. Going into policy making, you have to recognize who to lean on and depend on and trust and work with, who shares your values and who's going to get this done. They were such critical, hardworking, just absolutely critical. This would not have happened without them. And not just in the drafting of the bill, but in the day-to-day. So then me as the lawmaker, I have to get the thing through the legislature. So we do have to work with people who don't just accept my wonderful, perfect bill as is. I mean, but really that is part of the how it gets done. And if I hadn't had them sitting by me, making sure that the compromises we were making were still acceptable, still achieved the goals that we needed to achieve, again, it would not have been possible. I can't stress that enough. So, and then really just the women involved with that organization were so fun and amazing to work with. It's just definitely one of the highlights of my entire career. And I see the next question is who benefits from the legislation. So, so any woman in the state will benefit from the passage of the bill. So now not only do we have a mechanism to allow women to move forward with claims when they have experienced discrimination because of their gender, and we're building up the process to take care of those claims, but we also built in immediate actions that should prevent this kind of discrimination from happening. And when I say that, they're really not complicated mechanisms. We did things like, banning people from asking what your pay used to be, your previous pay, right? So what the problem with unequal pay is, men here, women here, and then just through your career, it continues to, that discrepancy grows. So once you're pigeonholed at a lower level, and then your future salary is based on your past salary, you can see how that cycle of inequity just continues. So we said, no, you can't ask someone what they used to earn. And that's fine. When I was hiring more than I do now, I didn't ask that. I said, what are your salary requirements? Personally, I did it to see if some new hire would take the initiative to advocate for themselves. But when we frame it in terms of the Equal Pay Act, there you go. Tell the employer what you need, and then you're not pigeonholed down in that underpaid level. We also said you can't, that you have to post salary ranges, and you have to make these new jobs. So basically, job opportunities and opportunities for advancement must now be made public. And so within your company, every employee gets to know about what opportunities are out there. So another problem that resulted in women being underpaid was that they were so commonly passed over for promotions. Men were just hand selected from the good old boys club and promoted with pay. So, the problem there is that when women don't know there's a job that's available to them, they can't apply and advocate for themselves. Also, publishing the salary range has other impacts. So if you're within a company and you see a new job advertised and the salary might be, I don't know, higher than yours, well, now you'll know that. And so you can go to your boss and say, I need a raise. And since the passage of the bill, these are the kinds of stories that I have personally been hearing in my Senate office. I can't imagine what you're hearing in your own organizations, but that's exactly why we did it. So, there will be immediate impacts. I've heard from women all across the state who have said, I just got a promotion and there's no way I would have even known about it if it weren't for your law. And this is a good company that treats their workers fairly, right? So it's not that every business owner or employer is some demon. It's just that these changes weren't going to be made on their own. It was long overdue. We had the answers. We made the law. And now it's having an effect. And if your other panelists want to touch on it, the most interesting thing this summer was how hard these companies, some of the bad actor companies, tried to avoid compliance with the law. And that has to do with remote postings and signs that basically say Coloradans need not apply. But I don't know, Harley, if you want me to get into all of that. It was just a really interesting, like I said, way that these companies tried really hard to continue to underpay women. And in the end, we worked with the department and we shut it down. So I'm happy to talk about that, but I think my time's probably up.
Yeah, I think maybe a story for another time, because I'm really interested in it. I know we're planning this event. There were just in our smaller committee questions about almost exactly that. But yeah, just wanted to thank you so much for giving us this context. I know in the room earlier I know I personally experienced it when applying for a job. It was so nice to see the salary ranges and probably helped us all to get, the money we deserve. So thank you so much.
And I just want to add one thing. For this law it's for current employees, but I mean, it will accelerate the closure of the pay gap in a really significant fashion. Like I have a 4-year-old daughter and I'm 8 months pregnant. And, when it's probably a girl, I don't know, but, when Isabel was in the Capitol when she was a baby, when we passed these laws, right? And she had this shirt that the women's bar, I think, made her that said 40, because had we done nothing, the pay gap wouldn't have closed until she was my age. Most of her career spent underpaid because she was born female. So having passed this, and those of you who are part of it and continuing the work, because it's not over, there's always more we can do. You can feel some pride in knowing that we're going to close that wage gap so much more rapidly with this significant piece of legislation. And that's why we did it, to help women get paid what they earn and end this kind of discrimination. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Okay, so I'm going to hand it off to Kelsey in just a minute to introduce our panelists. But before I do that, if you join virtually and you're part of the Junior League, please make sure to put your full name in the Zoom. You can just go to like the ellipses near where your name is, and you can go to rename if it's not currently like that. And maybe if you can also add like a dash Junior League or JLD2 to make things easier so that everyone gets credit for this event. But yeah, with that, I will pass it off to Kelsey.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We want to extend a special hello and welcome to our non-league members that are joining us tonight. One of the things that we love being able to do is sharing events like this with people outside of our league. So thank you for those of you that joined us. We have almost 100 people involved tonight. So thank you all so much. And we are going to dive in. We are just about to be spoiled rotten by some incredible people. We had the chance to meet with them last week to prep with this, and I think you all are going to learn so much tonight. So I have the honor of introducing our 3 panelists to you. So we are going to start off with Laura Wolf, and Laura is a partner at Spark Justice Law. Laura was part of the drafting of the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act, which was mentioned earlier. Her practice includes advocating on behalf of individuals suffering from abuses of their civil rights, including persons whose liberties are lost at the hands of the police and other government officials and employees facing discrimination in the workplace. In addition to her courtroom skills, Laura has utilized her legal acumen to secure sizable settlements and significant policy changes on behalf of her clients. Laura's work on a systemic race discrimination case resulted in the creation of an independent equal employment opportunity office for use by police officers impacted by discrimination in the workplace. So welcome, Laura. We are so glad you are here. In addition, Laura is joined tonight by Rachel Ellis. Rachel is a managing partner at Livelihood Law. Rachel provides counsel to private sector and federal government employees. Representative matters include discrimination, retaliation, sexual harassment, unpaid commission and wages, contractual disputes, non-competition agreements, severance negotiations, and unemployment benefits. As such, she regularly appears in front of the Colorado legislature, Colorado's state and federal courts, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, and the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. So welcome, Rachel. Thank you for joining us. And finally, we have Louise Meyerland, rhymes with Ireland. She just taught me that trick so I can remember. And Louise is the Vice President of Programs for the Women's Foundation of Colorado. Louise leads research, public policy, grant making, and statewide community engagement efforts to accelerate progress towards gender, racial, and economic equity for 2.8 million Colorado women and their families. In this role, she leads with trust and applies an intersectional approach to advocating for just, inclusive systems and investing in programs that improve the economic opportunities for women of every background and identity. Those are just brief blurbs on our panelists. As you can see, we are about to just gain a ton of information from these women and their experiences. As the panel is going tonight, remember to pop in questions in the chat if you have any that come up. We will have a few different times for question and answer period. And with that, ladies, I am going to turn it over to you.
Good evening. Hi, everyone. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you. And we have so much great information to share. Like Senator Danielson, I deeply value the leadership of the team at the Colorado Women's Bar Association. And it is an honor and a privilege for the Women's Foundation to work in concert with them to help make good changes in the law and to ensure that they are implemented well. Now, I'm going to do my best to remember to click the buttons to share sound and video clips because we have an interactive presentation lined up for you this evening. Really focus on the background and what the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act really means for you as employees and as job seekers. First, we are familiar with some of the background on why this was really necessary. You heard from Senator Danielson the gross discrepancies in pay based on gender and other elements of identity like race and ability, and those gaps were not closing nearly quickly enough. In 2018, Colorado women were earning just 86 cents on the dollar compared to their white male counterparts. In the midst of the early months of the pandemic, Colorado women were earning just 63 cents compared to what men were earning during the pandemic. And we've all been hearing as COVID-19 wears on, the economic impacts for women have been even more pronounced. And so we have not only a gap that existed before, but one that has widened in recent years that we need to work even harder to close. And this is an overview. The gaps are really gulfs when we look at the earnings for Colorado women of intersectional backgrounds and identities. The Latina Equal Pay Day that was just marked days ago is an acknowledgement that compared to white men, Latinas are earning just 54 cents on the dollar, which means that it takes nearly 2 years for their earnings to catch up to what white men earned in the year before. That's simply intolerable for their own experience to be undervalued so much, but also this is a huge drag on our entire economy. The inequities are so pronounced and completely unjust. If Colorado had closed the equal pay gap years before, our economy in 2014 would have grown by more than $9 billion. That's billion with a B, like boy. If Colorado women are paid equitably, we can expect that their higher earnings will be reinvested into their families and communities, as women always have and will continue to. We know that when women are doing better, we all have the opportunity to do better. Our communities and our entire economy are stronger. Those are some of the reasons that we have been advocates for the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act for as long as the Women's Foundation has existed. And this work was underway before we were a formal organization. And it's with our partners that we are so grateful that we've really gained the traction needed to really make this change. This federal effort has been underway, but without the teeth really necessary to ensure equal pay, since the 40s, since before our mothers, in most cases, were even born and began their careers. The work has continued, and it is stronger than ever here in Colorado with the implementation of the strongest in the nation protections for equitable pay on the basis of gender and other elements of identity. This will certainly have an impact on the economy overall, because as pay gaps are closed, we are going to see women earning more, and those additional earnings are going to translate into the dollars that women need to be able to pursue the opportunities and dreams for what's possible in their life. The additional earnings as gaps are closed of an average of $7,000 more a year can translate into nearly enough to complete a community college program, a certification or degree, or could cover the childcare so they're able to go to work and continue working and make sure that their children are safe, well cared for, and learning well while they are at work. There are so many ways that the Equal Pay Act will pay dividends for all of Colorado. And I'm so excited to be joined by our legal experts from the Colorado Women's Bar Association to dig in a little deeper on how we can translate the law that is in place, in action, and already showing impact in so many ways. How to connect what's written into the law into the practice in each of our professional lives, and demonstrating how we can apply this through each stage of the employment process, and to make sure that we're answering as many of your questions as possible this evening. I want to pause there because I seem to have lost video of everybody and haven't been keeping an eye on the chat. I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything before we really begin to dig in.
So video's working, everything's working, and you're good on the chat.
Excellent, thanks so much. So the Women's Foundation and Colorado Women's Bar Association have had the opportunity to deliver this webinar in a couple of instances together. And in an earlier version of this, we were joined by one of our community partners, the leaders of the team at Collaborative Healing Initiative within communities. They're providers of career readiness and employment services programming in many ways for Colorado women. They primarily focus on serving women of color here in the Denver area, with emphasis on supporting Black women in entering high earning career opportunities in the construction trades, and making sure that young Black women are supported in their educational and social development pursuits. And the team at Chic has been part of many of these equal pay conversations to help connect the dots between the way they're advising their participants on career readiness and how to navigate the nuances of securing a new job, with emphasis on the new rights secured by the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act. And I'll readily admit that I am no Hillary, but I'm going to do my best to share the encouragement, the support, and the guidance that the team at Chic provides to the women they serve. And there are 6 key elements that really factor into advocating for yourself for equitable pay from the beginning to the end of the interview and negotiation process. And it begins with acknowledgement that you have the opportunity to ask. with the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act, we are seeing in requirement with the pay transparency, or in alignment with the pay transparency requirements, we're seeing the pay ranges that employers are posting. That range itself, not being a single number that is represented, but a range, represents the expectation that employers have that job seekers will negotiate their pay. The job range should represent the value the employer sees for this position in contributing to the success of the company, and they expect that you're going to advocate for yourself to be paid as much as possible within that range. And you can position yourself to negotiate most effectively. You're really well prepared for the interview. You've become familiar with the company, what is important to them, and what's really going to be most important for success in that role you're interviewing for. You can ask key questions about what the most valuable contributors will bring to the table in that kind of role. And you can begin to mine for information about how the employer is going to be making compensation determinations. You can explore what's on the table in terms of the benefits that are on offer that will complement the direct pay structure as well. And she certainly advises all of their job candidates to be prepared to ask those key questions. They also advise that folks are well prepared for the interviews, that they show up on time, and that when introducing themselves and in every bit of the conversation, they show confidence in what they bring to the table and the value of everything that they'll be able to offer to that employer's success. We always need a reminder as women who so often tend to undersell ourselves that interviews are absolutely the time to believe in yourself and to share with the prospective employer how much value you really bring to the table, what you are really good at, and what their team is going to gain with you as a part of it. To be sure to ask those key questions after really selling yourself and all that you bring to the table, and following up with the beginnings of the negotiation once that job offer is made. That starts with really knowing what you're worth. I've loved hearing Hillary say this so many times. Think about it. Not only what you feel in your bones, you know you are worth, but what does the market tell you too? Now that we can all look at job postings that include pay ranges, we have much more information to help us really understand the value that we bring to the table, the value of the roles we're ready to play for employers. With that number in mind, know your worth and know that you can ask for, you should ask for every bit of your value. And to bring that confidence and that belief in yourself and what you know about what you are really worth into the negotiation. A good reminder for all of us as employees and job seekers is also that when an offer is made, we don't have to respond immediately. We can and should take some time to think about it, to consider all of the offerings, and to come back to the table after having a chance to think it through and come to an agreement that the employer and that you feel really good about, and to be sure to get that agreement in writing. And then to celebrate how great it feels to know that you asked for what you're really worth and that you're being paid equitably. We know that this is not always the comfort zone for women. We have all been socialized not to do this, and our employers have been socialized to expect that women won't come to the table with advocacy for ourselves. We absolutely have the right to, and we absolutely should ask. And we know that there is an expectation, there are greater protections than ever in place here in Colorado for employees to be paid equally. And this has been a long time coming as a refresher on why it is so necessary that we put some of these strongest protections in place, and we can continue to share with women how to really make the most of the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act, a reminder on where we've been and how much farther we still need to go.
A ticking bomb means trouble for Batman and Robin.
Holy, breaking and entering! It's Batgirl!
Quick, Batgirl, untie us before it's too late.
It's already too late. I've worked for you a long time and I'm paid less than Robin. Same job, same employer means equal pay for men and women.
No time for jokes, Batgirl.
It's no joke. It's the federal equal pay law.
Holy act of Congress!
If you're not getting equal pay, contact the Wage and Hour Division, U.S. Department of Labor.
Did you catch a copyright on that? It's 1973.
A
You don't have
ticking
to watch it again. I am going to figure out how to advance to the next slide and to turn it over to our team of legal experts who crafted this law to make sure that it ensures the strongest protections possible. Rachel, Laura, thank you so very much for being here to help us all understand how to make the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act work for us.
I will never stop laughing at that Batman video, which I had not seen until we were prepping to do this presentation. And it's really funny. I mean, like, it's no joke, but it's, I think that is a perfect part of this presentation. So this has definitely been a long time coming, and it is a tremendous piece of advocacy. It is a terrific bill, and it was a huge, heavy lift. Senator Danielson was in it, which doesn't, obviously, for every bill that legislators work on, they can't be on it 100% of the time, and it certainly felt like she was. And even over this last summer, she was down meeting with the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment to try to make sure that we didn't lose any of the ground that we gained when this bill was passed. So I think we're in good shape because there was so much thought that went into this, so many conversations. And what we ended up with is a private cause of action and transparency measures. So we really think about this in two parts, and so does the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. They've been very focused on transparency measures. That's what they have done rulemaking on so far. And there have not been very many lawsuits actually filed yet in Colorado, even though this bill kicked in January of 2021. So we're going to tell you about a lot of the details that matter in everybody's everyday life, because we know the stories that we hear on the ground, the things that people would tell us as attorneys, and we would say, the federal law really doesn't provide you with the protection that it should, or that we think that it should, or that we want it to prevent this situation from being something your employer is going to get away with. And this bill really does do that. So let's talk about some of the details.
Are we swapping, Rachel? What do you want? Rachel and I, we're in our planning mode right now, everyone too. That's because of me. So it's nice to see you all, except I can't see any of you, but it's nice to see Rachel and the other panelists who presented so far. As Rachel said, this is not only a long time coming, it really bridges so much of the gap between the federal law, what the federal law was meant to do, and where it stopped short from doing that, based on some judicial decisions really that interpreted it a certain way and made it quite limiting. So the main provisions, I'm not going to get into all the examples because we're going to talk about that, but basically it prohibits pay discrimination on the basis of sex. And while we use that term discrimination, just keep in mind, it's really about like disparate pay. You don't have to prove like intentional discrimination the way you typically think of that term, or at least lawyers typically think of that term. Just even if it's not intentional, you can't pay men and women differently for performing substantially similar work. And it also covers women plus other protected statuses. So we don't have that in the federal law. So basically, as long as there was a white woman making enough money, a Latina woman or a Black woman couldn't really raise a claim, or a woman who maybe is disabled, for example. So now we have this sort of extra status for what we call it gender plus, another protected status. It prohibits employers from requesting pay history because, again, as Senator Danielson pointed out, we don't want that pay history to become kind of embedded into someone's future wages. And they also can't rely on pay history if they discover it. Now, obviously, that's a harder one. So I'll say, for example, something I try to do is educate in my cases about, instead of giving a neutral reference that includes my client's last rate of pay, I actually typically will take that out, or I always take it out now. And I always explain, look, the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act doesn't allow that to even be considered. So I don't think your client should be sharing it with a third party, and it's meant to be innocuous. It's not meant to violate this law. That's typically what neutral references used to include, was the title, the dates of work, and the last pay, salary or wage rate. So I've been excluding that in settlement agreements on purpose.
I like to frame it as, certainly your company is up to date on the requirements of the Equal Pay Act, and you're not asking for prior pay history. So this needs to come out, and they do.
Yeah, I had someone where I kept reminding the attorney once that I'm sure you're not advising your client to violate this law. So you probably remove that. It kept getting put back in. And I kept reminding them of that. It also requires employers to internally post for promotional opportunities, as we discussed and we'll get into. If there is a job posting, it doesn't require that a job posting be made, but most companies that are looking for an employee will post a job, and that does require salary ranges to be included. And of course, we have anti-retaliation provisions or otherwise interference provisions, and we have certain types of record-keeping provisions. And I just saw something in the chat. The question about if your employer asks people to not talk about their wages, is that legal? No longer is that legal. We will get into that great question, Nina. That is no longer allowed. Next slide, please.
Okay, so I want to, we've covered what's in this slide, except that the last bullet is, this includes gender identity. This is another place where the law has been really behind reality, and it's catching up. In Colorado, there was a huge effort last year to, or last session, so this year, to sort of make things consistent throughout our statutes. And the point is, we want to make sure that we're not fighting over how people present themselves as far as their sex or their gender. So the Sex Plus provision of this bill came about because of really strong community partnerships and conversations, and hard conversations. I mean, hard conversations with organizations that represent traditionally women of color, and making sure that they had a voice at the table, and making sure that we were taking care of everyone and not just white women, which is sometimes a problem with bills that are designed to protect women, and then it turns out that it doesn't quite mean all women. So I just think that this is something that isn't in any other bill in the country, as far as we know. It's a huge triumph because this addresses the intersection of people's real lives. And this is like a huge triumph, and it was the result of having hard conversations, being willing to be educated about what was going on, and really listening and making sure that while we were working on this, we were doing the best we could for everyone. Oh, okay. Laura, do you want to introduce this, or do you want me to introduce it?
I did watch it. So there was a lot of these great videos that I was not here for the last talk, and I got to watch the last talk in preparation for today. This is, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, this is going to be a video you're going to see of an equal pay example of two associates actually discussing their wages. So Nina, to your question, you're going to see a few videos that get to that point about the right to discuss wages. And this is meant to show some of the clarity that can be found once you start having job postings with salary ranges, what happens to current employees who maybe realize that they're being underpaid for that role. Rachel, is there anything you would add?
And I would just say that the people in these clips are friends and colleagues, and you will notice that they are not paid actors that were hired to do this. So I think you'll get it, but go ahead, Luis.
All right. Well, I'll wrap up the motion, draft an order, and I'll get that over to you by the end of business day.
Sounds great. Really good job with this argument. But I actually want that in by 3 today.
Okay, not a problem. We'll do.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All right. Next meeting.
All right. Hi. Good morning, Lori.
Hey, good morning.
Did you see that posting for the new associate? I'm so excited. I have a couple of people that I'm going to send it to. I think we could really use the help with our pre-lit load.
Such great news. Show me. Did you see the full range salary?
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
But that's our same job. Wait, are you getting paid that in that range?
Yeah. What are you worried about?
Oh, nothing. I'll see you later at 4:30. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.
That's not what I'm getting paid.
So as you saw, and we can discuss a little, one thing that, as I mentioned, these postings will do is help people who are currently employed discover if they are being paid less than what they're entitled to and what the employer considers fair. So one thing I want to say just on this piece, Rachel and I both own our own businesses. We're both small business owners. We also have to comply with this law, I think happily so. And I don't know what it's like to run a mega corporation, so to speak, but I do think it's always interesting when I get told that, it's really difficult for employers to comply with this law. It's difficult for them to put a pay range. For me, when I thought of hiring my first attorney, we have 2 attorneys now at the firm, I did have to put a lot of thought into what can I afford to pay this person? What's a fair salary for the work I'm asking them to do? What are fair benefits for me to offer? And I think that any employer who's offering a job should be having those conversations internally first before they're even having a meeting with someone about the role. So to me, I just want to also add, it shouldn't be that high of a burden because employers should be thinking about this in advance. And honestly, if you're not, then you're not in a great bargaining position even as an employer. So for those of you who run small businesses or you run your own companies, that's great. I think that this can only help also not end up overpaying people, who just are good negotiators, but maybe don't bring that much value to the table.
I want to add that with the range that gets posted, it has to be a fair approximation or guess of what they can pay. And so it's possible you should still negotiate. You could negotiate your way above the range that's offered, but also if they say this is really our range, then it's part of the negotiation and you should just try to get them as high as possible, right? So if employers are providing this range in the job ad and someone tries to negotiate higher, I've been in this situation where I've had to say, we are a small business, like this really is the range. Like I'm not messing around, like, I like you, if you can accept this job, if you think you're the right person, like, let's do it. And that worked for me. But the fun thing about this part of the law is that it is already making tremendous waves. You've probably seen it, many of you, that job postings are out with the compensation described. So that doesn't just mean salary, it means benefits, it means anything that's part of the compensation from the employer. And that is hugely valuable so that you know what you're getting into. And when you think about it and how fast this becomes the new normal, because we're on our way there, 5 years from now, it will be unthinkable to remember going and sitting for a job interview and not having any idea what they were going to offer you. Mm-hmm. So, which should be a thing of the past, because it should be about the job that you're doing and not how low can you get someone on board to do the work. And I know that in bigger corporations and bigger companies, there were often these unspoken rules about who got what deal. And we like to think that we're eliminating that. When I was talking to a bunch of business attorneys at conference, someone said, what if the plan is not to offer everyone the same compensation package? And I was like, are you kidding? Like, that's exactly what we're eliminating here. So I was like, I think you need to call your attorney and talk through that. But Emily just asked a question and said, is there anything that prevents companies from posting a range where the maximum is well below the actual range? So if they do that and then they're paying people outside of the range, I think that they're potentially setting themselves up for some problems. If someone finds out that, they're still being paid within the range, but they're at the bottom and it's significant and it looks like there's a difference based on sex or sex plus situation.
I'll also add that it would be a violation, like if you had proof of it, with respect to having these HR representatives, let's say, share it with you, or there's internal emails, that's just a violation of the duty to post a reasonable range, that in good faith, that they have a good faith duty. And that can be reported to the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, who are enforcing these transparency rules pretty aggressively. And it can be reported anonymously as well. And I have checked and confirmed it is fully anonymous when you report anonymously. And so I checked with the head of the Wage and Hour Division. And so just keep that in mind too. If you're going, well, that just seems unfair, but I don't want to necessarily put my name out there, you can report it. And then like Rachel said, if they just are paying people differently. So this transparency rule is separate and apart from whether they have to pay people equally. They still have to pay equally based on sex or sex plus. And then the transparency is meant to actually not have that be the middle of the range, to see who negotiates outside of it. The goal is to give a good faith range. The one other thing I was going to add, I have, a friend who's the owner of like a medium-sized business that's quite large, much larger than mine, for example. And she noted that she has concerns because sometimes she'll post for a job and she'd be willing to both consider someone with less experience and someone with more for that role. And she doesn't know how to post the salary range. And I said, well, you can post too. You can say junior level with 1 to 3 years experience, this is the range, and more senior level of 4 to 7 years experience, this is the other range. As long as it's good faith and you're making it clear what you plan to pay based on the experience and the skill, then you're complying, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. So, okay, one last thing about the clip that we just watched. I think that if you are working with people day in and day out, you get a feeling for what your relationship is like, right? So in that situation that we just saw, I want to get the names of the characters right. Lori, Lori is the associate who was like, oh, I'm not getting paid that. And even though she said at the end, oh, nothing, never mind, I have a feeling that her colleague knows what just happened. And sometimes your colleagues are your allies. So you have to be reasonable about when you talk to colleagues about compensation, like choose your time wisely, the moment wisely. But I think that if your colleague knows that you're working hard right next to them and you're being paid less than them and the optics aren't good, I think often colleagues are people that will help you out to a degree.
Yeah. And we got one more question in the chat, which is, how does this apply to a current employee who wants to explore in-house ranges for a job above their level that they're exploring promotion for or on a training track for before the job is posted? When must the job be posted? Well, technically, there's no time period when that promotion, for example, or the job, whether it's considered a promotion or not, must be posted. So again, if it's just considered a job that like is a new creation, when I started my firm, I had no associate attorneys. I was just creating that role. That's a job posting. I'm not required to post for the job. If I want to find people, to find applicants, I can. If I want to hire someone I know, I can also do that. For a promotion internally, like let's say an opening comes up where you would be moving up a step and it's a position that's a promotion and could be seen to be one for anyone in the workforce, and they have to post it. There is no time frame. It does have to be posted before the decision is ultimately made, and you have to give notice basically to everyone at the same time or as reasonably as possible. So usually if it's a large company, through email or some type of intra notification kind of intraweb. In terms of exploring that, Rachel, I'd love your thoughts. What I would say is really talking to people internally. You do have the right to discuss your wages if people feel comfortable, talking to people previously in that role who have left, maybe looking on Glassdoor, other websites, but it would be in that promotional posting once that's up. Before that time, I'm not sure if there's a way. Rachel, any thoughts on that?
I think that it can be kind of situational, but if you are somewhere where there is structure as far as a path of progression, I mean, in the government, it's very structured. So often you know exactly what you need in order to move to the next level. But I think that you can ask your supervisor, you can ask HR and say, okay, what does it take for me to get the title senior marketing executive or whatever it is that would be the next position that you would like to do. And you have to pay attention and then you have to meet those responsibilities. And then if you meet those responsibilities and they don't promote you, then I think that's a great sign that you should be looking for a job somewhere else.
We have one other question. How do you find out if there's a pay gap with colleagues who do the same job as you? How do you start this conversation with someone? I mean, to Rachel's point earlier, can be a really difficult conversation. I advise clients all the time about that who come to me suspecting there's a pay gap, but they don't really have proof of it. And I just, let them know without that proof, it could be really hard, a really uphill battle. They could be going at it not really knowing. And so I just encourage them to have like an open and honest conversation depending on their relationship and just saying, I've always just been curious what you earn. I've always kind of wondered if like maybe I'm earning less than others around me. And I just wonder, and one way you can always approach it too is say, I want to make sure that both of us are being paid equally. So we talk about this bill as though it's only relates to women. It actually just relates to every person. It just says you can't be paid differently based on sex. Obviously, the data shows that typically it's women overall who are paid less than men, but that's not always the case. And so having someone else out there who wants to maybe share that information with you because they also want to make sure they're being paid fairly, or maybe they're just an ally. They want to make sure others in their workplace are being paid the same as them. It doesn't matter if they're being paid the highest, they would want you to rise up. So I usually tell people to find allies or people that they trust the most. Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's pretty situational. And if you're at a big place, then chances are sooner rather than later, you're going to see a posting for your job. And if you're not in that range, I mean, I would say make your plan, but to go to HR.
We're going to get into your question in the next couple slides. So we'll get there. Yeah. Next slide, please.
Okay, sure. So we were looking at the places where we thought the federal law needed to be better because employers can actually get away with quite a bit under the federal equal pay law. So under the Colorado Equal Pay Act, pay gaps are prohibited as long as people are doing the substantially same thing, substantially similar work. And that's because people end up with different titles and they say, these jobs are completely different. This person's responsible for this on Thursdays and your person's responsible for this on Tuesdays. And so it was way too impractical. And I believe that's how it was designed, or how it came to be under case law, that any difference in what the job was used as an excuse to pay someone differently. So specifically in Colorado, it looks at what it takes to do the job, shift work, and job responsibilities. And if they are doing substantially similar work, then they need to be paid equally.
So again, this is a long list, but going to your question, Erin, yes, if there is a seniority system is a key word here. So a seniority system that would pay someone more for longer tenure, then yes, that is valid, but it has to be a system. It can't just be, well, I don't know, just John's been here longer. That justifies the pay. Similarly, a merit system, again, having I think John's just doing better. You have to have a system in place, and then you have to, be able to demonstrate that that system is in place and being applied equally to your employees. Similarly, the third one is kind of just what we consider usually commissions, things like that. So a system to measure earnings by quantity or quality of production. There can be a difference based on geographic location when it makes sense, of course. So if you're in Denver compared to New York City, you can understand how, your pay might be different based on the cost of living. If you're in Denver compared to, in Durango, you can also understand how your pay might be different based on the cost of living. Education, training, or experience, going to Rachel's point, to the extent that these are reasonably related to the work in question. So Rachel, I think you had a good example in the last one, if you want to take it, but sometimes job postings include include things like a bachelor's degree that really isn't necessary for the work. If you want to speak to that, I'll add the last two, the travel, if the travel is a regular and necessary condition of work. So keep in mind, and this actually came up once on something I was working on under this bill, whether traveling to your job is considered part of it. Well, no, traveling to your work isn't even considered work for like a workers' compensation claim, let alone the fact that someone lives further away is not a regular necessary condition of their work. What you would normally think of as someone who has to travel for work. So like if you're an attorney at a large firm and you have to travel across the country all the time, that's the travel we're talking about. And then again, this is an exhaustive list. So in the Federal Equal Pay Act, they have this catch-all that says, or any other reason that justifies the pay differential that isn't sex, which is what Rachel is talking about the design of the bill to maybe not capture all of this, or at least the interpretation of it. Now this is a limited list, and these are the only reasons an employer can provide.
So my one really annoying example about reasons that someone else can be paid more is that you no longer can a boss say, I really like John. We do fantasy football together and he's such a great guy. He just really gets it. And his emotional attachment because they share this fantasy football experience is not a reason to pay him more if it has nothing to do with the work that's actually being done. So that kind of stuff is so frustrating. I hope to see less and less of it. Laura, that was my example on educational requirements. But one other thing about the geographic location is that actually, the pandemic was a whole thing, right? We didn't know that was coming. Sometimes pay is higher outside of a metro area because they're we can't get anyone to live in, I don't know, Stilltown, Colorado, so it can go either way. And now I hope all of you are negotiating for remote flexibility when you need it. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I love this video. Let's just watch it. Go ahead.
Hi, Lori. It's nice to see you today. How are you holding up with the remote work?
Hi, Stacy. Oh, as well as everyone else, I guess. How are you doing today?
I have just been so busy with all of the new hires and related paperwork. What can I do for you today?
Well, it's funny you mentioned new hires. This is kind of hard to talk about, but I was talking to Sarah and she let me know she's making a lot more than me.
Why on earth would Sarah tell you what she's making? We have a policy that prohibits that.
No, wait. She didn't just burst out. I saw the job posting for the new associate positions and it listed a starting salary range as $110,000 to $120,000. And I'm not even making close to that. So I asked Sarah if it was in her range and she said, yes, it was.
Well, I still can't get past the fact that you two were discussing your salaries at work. Do you not have enough work to do?
Of course we do, Stacy. I'm just concerned that I'm not being paid fairly as compared to Sarah.
Well, Sarah is a female too, Lori. There is no equal pay disparity here. And besides, I am the one that approves all associate salaries and raises. Are you claiming that I, a woman, are paying you less because you are a woman? That is ridiculous and offensive.
No. I'm not accusing you of anything, Stacy. I am simply concerned that Sarah, a white female, is making more than me, and apparently so will the new associate. It is to my understanding that this would violate the new equal pay law in Colorado.
Well, I think you are overreacting. We are obviously aware of the law and are acting accordingly.
Well, could you at least look into it?
No, I already have all the information I need. If that is not enough for you, you can certainly raise this with our managing partner if you feel that is a good idea. Otherwise, I suggest you get back to work.
Thanks. I guess that's all. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
This video always makes me crack up because
so uncomfortable.
Stacey is so nice in real life, and I can't imagine how she did all that with a straight face. So sorry everyone, it's knowing Allison is just too funny. She's the one who plays Stacey. So obviously this is an example of the clueless HR rep. I have a case like this right now. Similarly saying, if you're not happy with your pay and you think it's because of your sex, go find a job elsewhere. And then my client was fired. Shocker. So I don't know how this still happens. I don't know. I genuinely am shocked by it. When I say that, I mean it. So, we're having Lori's doing the right thing. She's going to HR. She's explaining it. Obviously the first response to that HR is unhappy that people are discussing their wages. So one thing just to note is we've actually had that protection in the law here in Colorado for quite some time. It's already been a protection under our state anti-discrimination law that allows you to discuss your wages. The National Labor Relations Act, which is from the 1930s, that provides that you can engage in what's called protected concerted activity. And if you're a non-managerial employee, that means that you can discuss your wages as well, if it's for the betterment of your workplace or for your own terms and conditions of employment. So it's always amazing to me because there are a lot of companies that still don't want people to talk about this, but it's been part of our system now for under the NLRA close to 90 years or 85 years or so. Obviously, I think Lori's doing exactly the right thing here and Stacey is doing exactly the wrong thing here. Rachel, what would you add to this? I mean, I think, clearly Lori should be looking for a job elsewhere and she should be looking for a lawyer, but what would you add to that?
Yeah, so I want to let you know that these are the stories, that's a classic, a client coming to us, that's a classic description of why they're coming to see an attorney, because the conversation with HR went so badly, but it doesn't always go like that. So please don't think that if you go to HR that it's going to end up with a threat, why don't you take it above me if you feel like that's a good idea. That's actually not true. Most of the situations where there is an equal pay issue, the employee wants it fixed. I mean, they want it fixed. And if the company is willing to fix it, then there's a chance that that employee might stay for a long time if they feel valued. There are all kinds of arguments that they've run into that we've tried to eliminate with this Equal Pay Act, which that are covered in this video. Well, there's a white woman who's being paid the same as you, so it can't be about being a woman. I'm a woman, I can possibly discriminate against you. That's completely false. I already have all the information I need, and I don't need to look into this any further. That's the kind of thing that lands HR in an eventual deposition. So, I mean, it doesn't always go like that. Sometimes it can get fixed. There are some things that were other traditional messages that no longer should be part of the conversation. So one thing that was always really difficult to hear was that, okay, you've brought this to my attention. I'm going to look into it, but I want you to know our budget's already decided. We can't possibly do anything about this for, until 8 months down the road when we have a chance to reevaluate our budget. There was lead time in this bill for companies intentionally to perform these pay audits and get their act together to make sure that they weren't in violation of this bill. And that time has come and passed. So it's actually no longer a reasonable thing at all for a company to say, oh, gee, we'll look into it. And, next year we'll talk about it. This bill is already in effect and they can't continue to violate the law, especially if somebody flags it for them and says, I'm worried about this. This is a problem. I know I'm being paid less. They need to fix it without delay. And going back to the public policy person's question, what does the seniority system mean if not determined by the length of employment? it could mean in-house for seniority, or it could mean like in the industry. So whatever the system is, it just needs to be consistent for everyone at that company.
Yeah. And I would just add to what Rachel was saying, even about, HR, and don't be worried. Like, this is very much clearly like the worst case scenario. And like Rachel said, like that's why we represent those clients. I always say that I have this very limited sample size of employees in Colorado. All of them seem to be quite unhappy. I don't believe that every employee in Colorado is unhappy, but the ones who call me generally are. That's why they're calling. So I have absolutely had people call me who are being underpaid and who want to hire me. And I'll actually say, look, I don't think it's going to help you to get a lawyer involved right now. You're still working. Have you talked to HR about it? How have you addressed it? And I've just sort of walked them through the process, and they have gone from wanting to hire me to getting through the whole thing and getting their back pay paid for them for a couple of years too. So I've seen it happen. I've had more than one example of that happen. Also, I tell people sometimes, if your employer is just unwilling to value you, yes, you can bring a claim, that's fine and great, but you also should find an employer who values your contributions. And you shouldn't just stay working somewhere that isn't going to pay you equitably for your time if you don't love it anymore. A lot of my clients do not like working for an employer that they feel they've addressed this with, that they feel the employer has not taken seriously. It takes a lot of the joy out of work to feel like you're constantly being undervalued. So it's okay to switch jobs. And we're going to do a quick breakout after this discussion, everyone, too. But yeah, so I just wanted to add that, like, please do go to HR. Also document your conversations in an email. If you're just having everything oral, it can be dangerous. Some people do record conversations. That can help. It can also hurt. It just depends on how the conversation goes, but make sure that you document in writing afterwards. Hey, we had this discussion. I want to follow up. Again, this is my concern about my pay. And I do want to add, one thing we didn't talk about is the only reason, certainly Lori would have arguably a race discrimination claim where she'd have to prove intentional discrimination based on race. But here, because we have that sex plus, she can also just show disparate pay based on sex plus race. So just keep in mind that takes out that need to show intentional discrimination. Are we going to our rooms?
Yeah. Take a break, get another drink.
A break or a breakout room? I don't know. Rachel,
We are going to do a break and breakout rooms because we have some people who are in person and can't do breakout rooms. So we are going to take just a quick 5-minute break, refill your wine, get a bathroom break. Those of you that are in breakout rooms, we'd love for you to introduce yourselves, take a second and chat about what has stuck out to you so far, and feel free to generate any questions that you have. Wait till you come out of breakout rooms to pop those in the chat, otherwise we won't be able to see them. But let's do a quick 5-minute break, and those of us in person can introduce ourselves and visit here in person. Thank you. You're so close. I know. So close. So close.
We're unmuted. The room is, I don't know.
Are people coming back?
Yeah, we're like 67.
It's cool to see that many people.
Yeah.
All right, we are gonna pull everyone back together. Thank you for taking a break and checking in with your fellow league members and league guests. We have about 30 minutes left. Please keep the questions coming. You all are asking great questions, and we are going to dive back in.
I don't know if I see me.
There we go.
There I am. We are going to talk about promotions being posted, I think, later on. Is that right, Rachel? If so, we can get to Lindsay's question in a few moments when we get there.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Do you want to talk about compensation?
Sure. So, okay, we mentioned this earlier, but these are three really important things. So compensation means the total package. Okay. So one of the things that can happen at law firms is that equity tracks can be different. You can get mommy tracked, which was probably initially well-intentioned to provide flexibility, but then you hit a glass ceiling. So compensation means everything. And the pay gap, there's no magic number. It just means less. Finally, there's no grandfathering in of breaking this law. Employers can't justify continuing to break the law by saying that this is how we've always done things. Next slide.
So the pay history ban we already talked about, not being able to seek someone's prior wage rate or rely on. The reason we included both is what we talked about before. You have employers who, that's part of the neutral reference. Neutral reference, for those of you who haven't heard, is sort of when you call usually like a main line or a main person at HR who just kind of has like a little script of what they'll tell you about the person. And it's nothing else, there's no positive or negative. It's just confirming that they worked there, when they worked there, their title, those types of things. And a lot of times that salary gets included. We want to phase that out, but in the meantime, we want to say you can't rely on it. Obviously, a candidate can volunteer their pay history. Maybe you're paid really, really well and you want to bring that up and you want to use that to justify going above the pay range. That's okay. You can do that. It's just that they can't ask you for it to sort of continue that cycle. And then they're not supposed to rely on that to determine a pay range. Obviously it gets a little wonky there because you are allowed to negotiate for a higher salary. You are allowed to do that. And I think part of that process is not saying so much, well, this is my value because I was paid it before, but instead saying, look, for me to leave my current job to come here and do this work, this pay is just not going to work for me. I have friends who leave the private sector and go to nonprofits or go to other types of companies that can't pay them the same amount. And so they can use their past salary to at least say, I just can't justify it unless you can pay me more. And the employer has every right to say, I just unfortunately can't pay you more. Or what, we can make that work, but it's not going to be your old wage range. I can add $5,000 or $10,000 to your compensation.
A bonus sign-on gets factored into total compensation in that companies can't be offering sign-on bonuses in varying amounts for people that are doing the same job. And then Lindsay's question about whether all internal promotions have to be posted. Yes, they do. And before the decision is made. So it's pretty disheartening to find out that someone has been selected to do a job and you didn't even know that there was an opportunity to put your name out there. So I think that leads us perfectly into our next video.
Let me say one last thing on that. There are a couple exceptions, and some exceptions include interim postings or like an interim filler, or sometimes where there's, someone doesn't know that they're going to be let go, and you don't need to notify everyone, hey, Sarah's position's about to be open, she doesn't know yet though. So there are times where you don't have to post in the same way. When you have someone interim replacing someone else, then you do need to post when you're officially going to be replacing that role full time. So you can't just say, well, the interim's been doing a great job, let's just keep him or her there. You do have to post for that role.
Okay, so this video is about pressure to provide past pay. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thanks for agreeing to do this via Zoom.
That's okay. It's so nice to meet you, Ms. Duffy. I'm Anna Rayner.
Oh, please call me Mel. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was raised in Denver. I graduated with a BS in marketing, and then I began my career in the accounting world. In my current job, I focus on social media and product placement.
Well, that doesn't tell me much about you personally. What do you do in your spare time?
Well, I volunteer at a number of community service organizations, and I'm also an avid runner.
Great. Well, as you know, we're looking for an account executive that will focus on recapturing some of our print market and who will also spend a good deal of time planning events. You know, we run a tight ship around here, and we're really looking for a team player who can fit in with the rest of us.
Well, that's right in my wheelhouse. I love planning events, and I also love working as a member of a team.
I got to warn you, though, because of the pandemic, you know, things are tight for us right now. And how much money are you expecting to make?
Well, the salary range posted was $50,000 to $65,000. That would suit my needs, entice me to leave my current employer and accept the position.
It sounds like you're not making that much right now.
Well, I didn't mean to suggest that. I'm looking for opportunities to broaden my skills in a larger agency, and the range posted would work for me.
So what exactly are you making right now?
Well, I would say enough to get by, but definitely not enough to do the things that I want to do.
Look, Anna, I kind of feel like you're dodging the question. Well, why can't you just tell me what you're making?
Well, I think I'd rather just focus on this new position. You know, what matters to me is that I'm excited about the job and eager to join your agency in this role.
Well, you know, we have 5 other applicants, so I'm trying to figure out how, you know, what it's going to take for you to accept the job. Can you at least tell me that?
Well, I would say based on the range and my experience, I would expect to come in around 60,000.
Well, I appreciate your confidence. You know, we'll let you know in about a week or so.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I really look forward to hearing from you.
Again, these are wonderful people. So these videos are so funny. So that also is kind of a worst case scenario. There's been a lot of training. CDLE is doing a lot of training about the fact that employers shouldn't be asking for past pay anymore. But it can happen. And in that scenario, Anna, I think was her name, was doing a pretty good job dodging the question, and she got called out on it. So I think that it's always a flag if somebody's pressuring you or breaking the law in an interview. Might not be where you want to go, but I think she did say things that were like really reasonable, and focusing on the range and what the job is, I think is the answer and a really good strategy.
Agreed. We can do next slide and see what's on there. So this was one of the first questions that was posed. So just noting that you can discuss your wages, you can compare your wages, you can ask about your wages. You have every right to do that. There's no employer is allowed to ask you to sign some sort of an agreement or even just orally agree to not share wages. So it's not like, well, this is law unless unless in our handbook we say otherwise and you sign it. Can't do that. Can't discriminate. The employer cannot take any sort of negative action against you for not disclosing your past wage rate. Of course, in practice, that can be difficult. If you're in an interview, it's not like, all these laws exist, to ensure the best practices. The reason Rachel and I have jobs is because employers often break these laws. We hope that they don't. I always tell people I kind of hope I can write myself out of a job one day. I don't know if that'll happen. I'm a bit of a cynic. So we'll see. But I would hope that they wouldn't hold it against you, but that can be really hard to prove. So just keep that in mind. I think stick to your guns. And like Rachel said, if someone's pestering you that much, it's probably not going to be a great place to work. And then finally, you know, an employer can't engage in quite a lot of conduct. We call it sort of interference, which is sort of taking any action that will kind of chill you from engaging in that conduct again. So coercing you, threatening you, interfering with you, intimidating you. And that can be you or any other person. It doesn't even have to be someone connected, any other person, because the person or the employee inquired about the wage rate or discussed it. So it's meant to be very, very broad. And the reason this is one of the only, I think it's the only area in the bill that just includes all third parties who are involved. And you can imagine, like, someone might be asking on someone else's behalf, you know, because that person's nervous to ask. Maybe it's a spouse or something like that. Maybe it's just a third party, like a reporter wants to know more. And if, you know, an employer starts to mess with that person, they can say, no, you're violating this law. Are recruiters subject to the law? Absolutely. So recruiters, I don't know if, Lindsay, if your question in particular is about, you know, compensation or other areas, but recruiters can't, you know, assist an employer by posting a job, for example, and not including a pay range, or assist an employer who says, well, you know what, I really want to get someone on the cheap, so make sure you find out what their pay history was and you know, make sure to really drill them on it. They can't do that. So recruiters, you know, there's been some cases actually like through the EEOC where a recruiter says, well, the employer's preference is to not have employees of color. And so we have just been funneling this employer only white temp employees, for example. A temp agency can't do that. There has been quite significant action taken by the EEOC against temp agencies recently for doing that. And it would be similar here if a recruiter tried to evade the law for an employer. Next slide.
It's $11, sir.
What's that?
$11? You owe an extra $1.
But I got all-day parking. Why is it more?
Because you have a penis?
Because of what?
$10 for women, but for men now it's $11.
We're not paying more just because he's a man.
No, you don't have to. Just him.
That's insane, mate.
I love this commercial so much. I can't say more things I love about it. I actually joke a lot with people. I'm like, we should charge, you know, a lot of men more for like day-to-day things that they need because they earn so much more. Their money goes so much further. I say that as a joke, obviously, but I really like the embodiment of that in that commercial to show how ludicrous that would be and how people would be up in arms against it, including women, including this man's wife. It's not just that he's against it, it impacts families. And one thing we haven't talked about yet, you know, when we asked Senator Danielson, wow, at the beginning of the talk, who benefits from this bill, it's really everyone in Colorado. It's women, it's their children. It's I was raised by a single mother with no child support. So, you know, we relied on her salary for me and my brother. It supports their partners. It supports other men in the community. So it's not just women who are being supported. And as you saw in that commercial, you know, this man, presumably his wife, doesn't want him to have to pay more either because that's their joint finances. Rachel, other thoughts on this video before we get to the revenues? I just love that video so much.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a good point. Okay, let's talk about remedies. What you need to know about this bill is that these are really great remedies. This is a good package because we want to make sure that if an employer breaks this law and it's time to hold them accountable, that it's a real like reckoning. So trial by jury is available and remedies include back pay. So that's the amount of money that you didn't make that you should have been making. And this was one of the compromises, but as things go, as far as how laws actually get made, some of you I know work on lobbying for the Junior League, and it is a impressively horrifying, scary process. Many people weighing in, and things can move really fast. Compromises get made, but this bill was just handled so well, and it was negotiated so well, and there were so many people on board with supporting it. And it's a really hard thing to say. I actually hate equal pay, even for legislators that don't traditionally support women's issues. So this got through, and what we ended up with is you can get 3 years of back pay. We were going for 6, we got 3. It's still good. I liked all back pay, but we had to put some kind of number on it. So liquidated damages, that means that we take the amount of economic damages and we double it. Reinstatement, promotion, pay increases to get them where they should be. Those are all possible remedies. And then your attorney fees and costs get paid by the employer on the other side. And then other legal and equitable relief. That means whatever the court thinks is fair. And sometimes that means the company agrees to training or monitoring or doing something different, or so often people are like, I'd like this person fired. That doesn't always happen, right away. And companies are reluctant to say it's definitely because of this lawsuit. But, karma catches up with most people, I think. So the remedies are really, really good. And we now have used this model to get the same kind of damages in other legislation in Colorado. So everything that moves women forward, it's all a continuum and everything is related. So this helps us in other areas of the law as well.
And I just want to add that, some people were like, this is so wonky. I remember being in some of these meetings where they're like, what other law allows you to get liquidated damages? And I had to point out the entire Fair Labor Standards Act and the Equal Pay Act, the federal one already allows it. So, these are amazing, amazing damages, but just keep in mind, anyone who's going, oh my gosh, they're just doing these wonky things out there in Colorado. No, these are also mirroring what the federal law provides. It's just that our law has more teeth to it to really make sure that that gap is bridged at some point, but it still provides pretty much similar remedies. Kim asked, how does past experience factor into the law? If two people have the same job at different levels of experience, i.e. one has been a manager and the other an individual contributor, can that justify equal pay? I think that it depends. If they're doing substantially similar work and the experience isn't coming into play in how they perform that work, that experience could be amazing, but it doesn't do much else. Maybe I have a ton of experience doing lobbying work as a lawyer, but then I'm going to work at a law firm where I'm just doing litigation. That's just going to be that skill is probably not going to be compensated. But if the skill set is compensated and it makes sense that that additional skill plays into the role, then I think you can compensate it more, either through seniority, like Kim, like Rachel mentioned earlier, or through the piece that says you can pay someone differently based on skill or training or education insofar as it plays into the role.
I can take this next question because I think this is really practical and we care about where the rubber meets the road here. So if you are going to court and you're in a trial, you don't have to exhaust your remedy in an administrative agency like you do with a typical discrimination situation. So that can take a couple years. And we know that this matters, and justice delayed is justice denied. And the longer it takes, the harder it is for someone to actually be able to see their claim through. So once you know that there is a problem, you can go to court in this kind of case. And that's still going to take maybe, 23 to 32 months before you get to trial in our federal court system. So, and if you are there
on average 36 months because of COVID. Yep.
If you're there in under 2 years, the court's going to be like, yeah, you're welcome. We're moving this through really fast. So often when people raise these claims, the company fixes it. If the company isn't willing to fix it and the person wants to go forward, they're probably not still working there by the time this goes to trial.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can ask for reinstatement. That is one of the options. Like, let's say you get fired because you talked about your pay, or because you were asking for a pay raise and you get retaliated against, you lose your job. And there was a case recently, it wasn't on equal pay issues, it was on discrimination, that someone did want to be reinstated and the court hadn't ordered it, and they actually won that up on appeal to the 10th Circuit. That's the court that sits above us here in the District of Colorado, saying, no, these remedies of reinstatement that are in other bills too, other civil rights bills, that they're meant to really provide that relief if the person can go back and work there. But they also talked about the fact that if it would be such an acrimonious workplace, that might not be a solution that's available. So you could ask for that if for some reason you lost your job. And it just depends. Most people, they don't want to work there anymore after that trial, because also the way that they defend these actions is usually saying that the person wasn't as good of an employee. And so a lot of people don't want to go back and work for that employer.
I've seen reinstatement work for very limited periods of time. Like if someone needed to hit a certain amount of time in order for their pension to vest or something like that, or in a really, really rare case, people often want this to happen, but it almost never does. The person that was the problem was the decision maker. They got fired as a result of what happened. And then my client took their job, which was perfect.
I love that. We have 2 other questions. Let's also go to the next slide just to make sure in case it's on those. So one question, I'll start with the first, is what do you do if a range is not posted on a job listing? So in terms of what you can do, you can absolutely contact the employer and say, hey, I was interested in this job posting, but I didn't see a salary range. Just a heads up, I think those are required now in Colorado. You can even give them like a little, a link to the CDLE, Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, their website on it. And you could just ask before you even link to it. And if they say, oh, we're not putting that up, you say, oh, I think it's required. Would you mind sharing it? If you're just asking how to report it, you can report it through the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. They have, these really easy to use complaint forms. Again, you can do it anonymously. They'll investigate. They won't give you any sort of money for doing that. There's no financial relief for you, but they will ding the employer so the employer changes the posting. Rachel, do you want to answer the second one? It's what resources are available to find information on competitive pay for a position?
The internet or talking to people. One of the issues that has, in a strange way, sort of contributed to the pay gap, I think, is that often when women talk to current employees, that women talk to women about this. And so if the women that are there are already being paid less than the men that are there, it sort of perpetuates the problem. So, but if you know someone who's there and you can trust them and you ask them if you feel comfortable talking to them about it, I think lots of people are happy to talk to their colleagues, especially if they're not there anymore. And they said, I worked there, doing this job for this period of time, and this is what I made, and, whatever.
I also think it's, I wonder, you'd have to really have, a lot of confidence to do this, but I'll say, I wonder what would happen if you just say, great, could you please let me know the pay range, the pay rate for the last, you don't have to name the people, but for the last 3 people who are in this role. I mean, I kind of think, again, you'd have to have a lot of confidence, maybe more than I would necessarily have, but I like the idea of just asking for it as though it's something you should get, because why not? Why wouldn't they share that with you? So an employer might be put off by it, but I think if you take the right approach, it wouldn't be as, it wouldn't seem as abrasive maybe, or as demanding.
I think that's risky.
I think it's risky.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of like someone just doing it. But I agree. I think it's risky.
If you're interviewing just to practice interviewing and it's not the job you really want, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be willing to lose out on that. But yeah.
But okay, so how would you recommend navigating a job posting that has an enormous range? I would suggest asking, how will you determine what part of the range someone falls in? Like, this is a big range. Like, what are you really looking for, for like at the top end or something like that. But a range of $100,000 when it's 50 to 150, that is wild to me. If there's a range of $100,000 and it's 400 to 500, I mean, all right, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah, but 150, 50 to 150 is a pretty big range. I would be asking, are you willing to consider people that are like right out of high school or right out of college, or like what's the explanation for the range being so broad? Nicely.
See, if it were me, I would just report that anonymously to CDLE and let them go, hey, employer, that's not a reasonable range, like fix it. It doesn't help you necessarily in real time. I think Rachel's, responses are way more about real time, but I certainly would report that if it were me.
So
I sometimes just want to scour the web to report things. This is like what I'm trying to say.
Well, here's my suggestion. If you feel like you want someone to report it, just email me. I'll report it. I've reported hundreds of companies at this point, so it's fine with me.
And then Drew, your question actually gets to what Senator Danielson was saying earlier. Do you want to touch on that, Rachel?
Yeah, so huge fight. In the end, I feel like we won. And what was
let me repeat Drew's questioning for the people in person. Drew's question is, what if the company is headquartered outside of Colorado, but they have branches here? Do they still have to legally post a range?
So here's the deal. If the job can be done in Colorado, then they need to comply with our statute. And there was a huge kerfuffle over companies posting things like, if you're in Colorado, you need not apply. That was coming primarily from one big law firm. And when the CDLE went after that big law firm and they caved, so they didn't get fined, they had to explain to all their clients who were being threatened with fines that they actually revoked their advice. And that was delightful because they never should have been in that position in the first place.
I didn't know that last thing had happened, but yes. And I was very upset with the employers that were posting, and I'll say, you can Google them. They're really big companies that absolutely say that they care so much about DEI and equity and women's rights and promoting women. And I couldn't believe how many of them were just not posting a pay range. So yes, everything Rachel said is correct. But like, let's say it's like a chain, like it's Walmart and they're only hiring like their Kansas store in Kansas City. No, they don't need to post a pay range.
I think we are running up against.
I think we are running out of time. So we'll click the next slide because you guys can all read this and get it. Sorry, I say guys a lot. I apologize, everyone. Promotions, we talked about that. So let's skip that one and folks can read that later, but we talked about it.
Okay, so this is a really great little video. Hit it, Louise. Thanks.
Hey, good morning. Ready to talk about Wednesday's agenda?
Definitely. Let's do that. But first, can we talk about this transition? How do you think it's going to go?
What transition?
Well, I mean, we knew Jim was leaving, but I didn't expect it to be so soon. I heard from Eric this morning that he'll be stepping up as our new director.
Well, the last time Jim talked to me about retiring, I let him know that I thought I had the capacity to handle the promotion. But he told me there wasn't any timeline, and that was just a couple of months ago.
Well, I guess it's a done deal as of next month. Eric is in an all-day meeting with Jim tomorrow, and then they're leaving at 4 to go to some social commitment.
Wow. Well, I'm surprised to hear this. I have more experience than Eric, and I know my metrics are better.
I know they are too. And you've been leading our team with this latest update. I was really surprised to hear it, but I guess the higher-ups really like Eric.
Yeah, you know what? I think I need a minute. Can we just log back on in 15?
Okay, see you in a few.
So Kim is going to go scream into a pillow in that video, right? This kind of situation is one that we don't want to see happening ever again. And that's what we were aiming to prevent with the posting of the promotion situation. And so we got a lot of pushback on that, but in the end it got through, and the thing that just happened in the video should not be happening anymore.
I do want to say one last thing on promotions. I know we're running out of time, but I do want to be clear. One of the compromises we did on that, because we had to, the legislative process is all about compromise, is that, there isn't some sort of obligation where you can say, look, you listed the promotion and the next day you notified us who you were going to promote. There's no time limit. Someone asked that, between times, and there's not even a claim you can say, if you didn't consider me, you already had someone in mind. That was part of the compromise. And part of that reason is if we can start getting employers to have to post promotions so that women can start throwing their hat in the ring and saying, I'm interested, I want to be considered next time, that at least gets us one step closer. So I want to be clear, like, this isn't the part that has the most teeth where you can say, you had to have considered me, you couldn't have made that decision. kind of in the back of your mind. But the goal is to say, no, you have to post it before you technically make a decision. You know, you can have an idea in the back of your mind, and then you can find out, hey, I didn't know that Kim was interested in that role. She'd actually be amazing. So you technically haven't made a decision. You haven't made an announcement, but you don't necessarily need to consider everyone or even give a large gap of time. And part of that, again, is part of that compromise. So just keep that in mind.
And this will hopefully eliminate some of those instances of what I refer to as benevolent discrimination, where they say, I know you have a lot on your plate. I didn't think you'd be interested in the additional responsibility, blah, 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 blah.
I like that term. I'm going to use that. I'll attribute it to you also. Record keeping, just keep in mind you have to keep records for the duration of folks' employment with respect to their compensation history, and then 2 years thereafter, so that covers the entire time period that they can file a lawsuit, and that you now have to have job descriptions for folks that work for you. Next slide. Oh, is that it?
Oh, this is it. This is it.
We're done. We went over. Sorry, everyone. We're chattered.
So what about a position if they reorganize? Well, so companies try to cover things up sometimes, and if it's shady, then you should do a confidential consultation with a lawyer. But if you know that it really was to try to get around the Equal Pay Act, then that's a lot of red flags, or a really big red flag. So maybe you start looking at other people's job postings, or if you want to address it within the company, you could make a plan and go to HR. You could talk to an attorney first and get your ducks in a row. Just depends on how much emotional energy you want to pour into that situation. Okay, I know that went way long. We're really into this bill, you guys. Thanks so much for listening to us.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry.
Thank you so much. It's okay that we went over. It was really interesting and helpful. So thank you so much, in person and online people. We want to thank Senator Danielson for her time, our three incredible panelists. We are so grateful for you guys sharing your information with us. We do have a few extra questions that I don't think we had time to answer. So panelists, if you don't mind, if we could pop a couple of those in your email inboxes, and then participants will send those out in a follow-up email with any additional resources, as well as a survey, just collecting some feedback. But let's give our panelists a big hand. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
And
we are not seeing.
We are so grateful. And thank you all for being here, and we will see you all again soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay, let me end.